Veltharis had never known fear. In 87 cycles of life, through hundreds of battles across dozens of worlds, fear had remained a foreign concept. The Kalith did not feel such primitive emotions. They calculated, they analyzed, they solved problems with logic and precision. War, to Veltharis, was mathematics. Every battle was an equation. Every enemy movement was a variable. Victory came from superior calculations, not from the chaos of emotion that plagued lesser species. The briefing room on Station Arc 7 was filled with representatives from across the Galactic Coalition. Veltharis stood at the back, towering over most of the other species present. The Kalith were tall, with smooth gray skin and large dark eyes that could process visual information 3 times faster than most biological entities. "The Ravager swarms have increased attacks in Sector 9, announced Commander Yeltho, a Praxian whose tentacles twitched with obvious stress. "We need to reinforce all strategic positions. The Council has approved the recruitment of Earth's military forces." Veltharis felt something close to skepticism, though the Kalith rarely experienced such inefficient thoughts. Earth, the newest member of the Coalition, a species that had only discovered faster-than-light travel 40 cycles ago. What could they possibly offer? "I will assign observation units to human battalions," Yeltho continued. "We need to assess their combat capabilities." That was how Veltharis found itself on a transport ship heading to Earth's primary military staging area. The assignment seemed pointless. Humans were weak. Their average lifespan was barely 100 cycles. Their bodies were fragile, their technology primitive compared to the Kalith. But orders were orders, and Veltharis always followed the logical chain of command. The human military base was loud. That was Veltharis's first observation. Everywhere, humans shouted, moved quickly, created noise without apparent purpose. They were small creatures, barely reaching Veltharis's chest, with soft skin and strange hair on their heads. "You must be our Kalith observer," said a human approaching Veltharis. He wore a military uniform with markings that indicated command rank. "I'm Captain Minho. Welcome to Firebase Delta." Veltharis studied the human. Minho was compact and solid, with dark hair and eyes that seemed to hold something the Kalith could not quite calculate. Not hostility. Not fear. Something else. "I am Veltharis. I will observe your unit's combat performance," Veltharis stated in perfect galactic standard. "Good. We ship out in 6 hours." Minho gestured for Veltharis to follow. "Let me introduce you to the squad." The squad gathered in what humans called a mess hall, consuming nutrition in a social setting. Veltharis found this inefficient, but said nothing. "This is Sergeant Hana," Minho said, pointing to a female human with sharp features and calculating eyes. She nodded at Veltharis, but said nothing. "Corporal Taiho." A stocky human with powerful arms gave a slight smile. "And our specialists, Private Jiwon and Private Doyun." 2 younger humans, both lean and quick-looking. Jiwon had kind eyes. Doyun had scars on his hands. "They're small," Veltharis observed. It was not meant as an insult, merely a factual statement. "Size isn't everything," Hana replied, her voice flat. "We make up for it in other ways." The briefing came 2 hours before departure. A holographic display showed their destination. Outpost Meridian, a strategic position on the edge of Ravager-controlled space. The outpost protected a vital corridor that 17 colony ships would use for evacuation. "Our mission is simple," Minho explained to the assembled soldiers. "Hold Meridian for 72 hours. No matter what, the colony ships need time to evacuate 340,000 civilians." Veltharis processed the data. Outpost Meridian had minimal defenses. Intelligence reported Ravager forces in the region numbered approximately 3,000 combat units. The human squad numbered 47 soldiers. Captain, Veltharis spoke up, I calculate your survival probability at 34%. A strategic withdrawal would preserve your forces for more favorable engagements. The room went silent. Every human eye turned to Veltharis. Minho looked at the Caliph observer for a long moment. We don't leave our posts, he said simply. Those civilians need 72 hours. We'll give them 72 hours. That is illogical, Veltharis stated. You will likely die. Probably, Doyun said from his position against the wall, but those 340,000 people won't. Math that. Veltharis could not understand. Why would these creatures voluntarily choose probable death? There was no calculation that made such a choice optimal, yet every human in the room seemed to accept this mission without question. The transport ride to Outpost Meridian took 8 hours. Veltharis spent the time analyzing tactical data, searching for variables that might improve the survival equation. The humans spent their time differently. They talked, they laughed, they told stories. Some slept, others maintained their weapons with careful attention. Jiwan sat near Veltharis, cleaning a rifle. First time working with humans? She asked. Yes. Your species is newly integrated. What do you think so far? Veltharis considered. You are inefficient, emotional, disorganized. Your tactical doctrine appears based on improvisation rather than calculation. Jiwan laughed. It was a pleasant sound, though Veltharis could not understand why. Yeah, that sounds about right, but we get the job done. How? Your physical capabilities are inferior to most coalition species. We're stubborn, Jiwan said, still smiling. Really, really stubborn. When we decide to do something, we don't stop. Ever. Outpost. Meridian was a collection of fortified structures on a barren moon. The defenses were adequate but not impressive. Automated gun turrets, energy shields, barriers, and trenches. Against 3,000 Ravagers, it would not be enough. The humans moved quickly, efficiently, setting up defensive positions. Veltharis observed that despite their apparent chaos, they worked with surprising coordination. Each human knew their role. Each movement had purpose. Veltharis, Captain Minho called. You're with me in the command center. I want your tactical analysis. The command center was a reinforced bunker with holographic displays showing the surrounding terrain. Sensor arrays detected movement in the distance. The Ravagers were coming. They'll hit us from the north and east, Hana reported, studying the displays. 2 main assault waves. Recommended response? Minho asked, looking at Veltharis. Concentrate forces on the northern approach. It offers the most defensive advantages. Abandon the eastern section. That leaves our flank exposed, Taiho pointed out. Yes, but it maximizes survival probability. Minho shook his head. We hold both approaches. Hana, take the east with 2nd Squad. Taiho, you have the north. I'll coordinate from here with reserves. It was the wrong choice. Veltharis knew this with mathematical certainty. Dividing forces would weaken both positions. Yet the humans moved to execute the order without hesitation. The sensors showed the Ravagers approaching fast now, thousands of them, insect-like creatures that moved in perfect coordination, driven by a hive intelligence that made them predictable and efficient. Veltharis calculated the humans had perhaps 6 hours before the defenses failed. After that, it would be close combat. After that, it would be over. In the command center, Minho checked his weapon calmly. Doyun brought coffee, a human stimulant beverage. The smell was unpleasant to Veltharis, but the humans seemed to find it comforting. You should evacuate, Veltharis told Minho. There is still time. Those colony ships need 72 hours, Minho replied. So we give them 72 hours. You will die. Maybe. But we'll die doing something that matters. Veltharis did not understand, could not understand. Death was the ultimate failure state. Avoiding it was the primary calculation in any engagement. Yet as Veltharis watched these small, fragile humans prepare to face an enemy force that would surely destroy them, something strange happened. A sensation the Caliph had never experienced, a feeling of wrongness in the calculations, an emotion that had no place in logic. Later, Veltharis would recognize it, but in that moment, preparing for battle beside humanity, the Caliph did not yet know the taste of fear. The Ravagers came at dawn, or what passed for dawn on this airless moon, where artificial lights marked time instead of a sun. Veltharis stood in the command center beside Captain Minho, watching the sensor displays light up with enemy contacts. 3,000 contacts, then 4,000, then 5,000. They brought more than expected, Veltharis observed, recalculating survival probabilities. The numbers were not favorable. They always do, Minho replied calmly, speaking into his communications device. All positions, weapons free, fire at will. The battle began with light and sound. The automated turrets opened fire first, sending streams of energy into the approaching Ravager mass. Explosions flowered across the barren landscape. Hundreds of Ravagers fell in the first volley. But thousands more kept coming. Veltharis watched, fascinated despite itself. The Ravagers moved like water, flowing around obstacles, filling every gap. They were efficient, predictable. Everything the Caliph appreciated in warfare. Then Veltharis heard something unexpected. A human voice across the communication channel, laughing. "That all you got?" Sergeant Hana's voice crackled. "Come on, I haven't even warmed up yet." She was laughing. Facing thousands of enemies, with death approaching at high speed, and she was laughing. The eastern defensive line erupted in fire as the Ravagers reached the first barriers. Through the external cameras, Veltharis watched Hana direct her squad with sharp precision. She stood exposed on a defensive platform that Veltharis had calculated as tactically unsound. Too exposed. No cover. A kill zone. But Hana stood there anyway, firing her weapon in controlled bursts. When Ravagers tried to flank her position, she forced them into a narrow corridor where automated guns cut them down. It was brilliant. It was also suicidal. "Sergeant Hana, your position is compromised," Veltharis reported. "Recommend immediate withdrawal." "Negative," Hana responded, her voice tight with concentration. "This is the choke point. If I move, they break through. I'm staying." A Ravager claw slashed close enough to tear her uniform. She didn't flinch, just adjusted her aim and kept firing. Veltharis observed something it had never seen before. Hana was afraid. The Caliph's advanced sensors could detect the biological markers, elevated heart rate, stress hormones flooding her system, muscle tension, every sign of fear. But fear did not stop her. If anything, it seemed to make her sharper, faster, more focused. On the northern line, Corporal Taiho faced a similar situation. A Ravager explosive had breached part of the shield generator. Sparks flew from the damaged machinery. Without the shield, that entire section would collapse within minutes. Taiho was already wounded. Veltharis could see the blood staining his uniform, the way he favored his left leg. He should be in medical care. Instead, he dragged himself to the generator, tools in hand. "Taiho, medical evacuation is recommended," Veltharis stated. "I can fix this," Taiho grunted, pulling panels off the generator even as Ravagers tried to rush his position. Other humans covered him, firing around him, but it was only a matter of time. The Ravagers got closer. 10 meters. 5 meters. Taiho kept working, his hands steady despite the obvious pain. He rerouted power cables, bypassed damaged circuits. The shields flickered. 3 meters. The humans covering him were running out of ammunition. Taiho slammed the final connection into place. The shields flared back to life, catching 2 Ravagers in the energy field and disintegrating them instantly. "Fixed," Taiho said simply, then collapsed against the generator, breathing hard but smiling. Veltharis could not process this. A wounded human, in severe pain, had voluntarily placed himself in extreme danger to repair equipment. Not because it was safe, not because it was logical, but because it needed to be done. The battle intensified. The humans were being pushed back, step by step. They lost the outer defenses, then the secondary barriers. The Ravagers were relentless, and there were so many of them. Then Private Jiwan did something that made Veltharis question everything it knew about sentient behavior. An alien soldier from the Praxian species had been hit by Ravager weapons fire. The Praxian fell in the open, between the human lines and the advancing Ravagers. It would die there. The logical choice was to let it die. Saving it would risk human lives. Jiwan ran into the open. "Jiwan, no!" Minho shouted, but she was already moving. She sprinted across 20 meters of open ground while Ravager weapons fire tore the ground around her. She reached the Praxian, grabbed it with both arms, and started dragging it back. The Praxian was twice her size, but Jiwan didn't stop, didn't hesitate. Other humans provided covering fire. Taiho, still wounded, fired from his position. Hana redirected her squad's weapons. Doyun threw smoke grenades to obscure the Ravager's vision. Jiwan made it back to the human lines. The Praxian soldier saved. She was breathing hard, sweat covering her face, but she was grinning. "You're crazy!" The Praxian gasped in gratitude. "Yeah, probably," Jiwan agreed, already reloading her weapon. Veltharis approached her during the brief lull in fighting. "Why did you do that? The risk was unacceptable. That soldier was not human, not even from your world." Jiwan looked at Veltharis with those kind eyes. "Does that matter? They needed help. We help. That is illogical. Maybe, but it's what we do." The first day of fighting lasted 18 hours. When the Ravagers finally pulled back to regroup, the humans had held. Barely. The defenses were battered, ammunition was running low, 20 human soldiers were wounded. 3 were dead. Veltharis moved through the defensive positions, observing. The humans did not celebrate their survival. They tended their wounded. They shared food and water. They checked weapons and ammunition. They prepared for the next assault. That night, Veltharis stood watch with Private Doyun. The young human sat on a damaged barrier, eating something from a ration pack. He offered some to Veltharis. "We do not eat during duty hours," Veltharis stated. "Your loss. These are terrible, but food is food." Doyun chewed thoughtfully, looking out at the dark landscape where the Ravagers waited. "You're wondering why we fight like this." It was not a question. "Your tactics are inefficient. Your willingness to risk death for marginal gains defies calculation. Yet you survive battles you should lose." Doyun nodded. "You know what our planet is like? Earth? I have read the reports. A standard habitable world." "Standard?" Doyun laughed. "Yeah, I guess. Except Earth tried to kill us for millions of years. Predators, diseases, other humans. We've been at war with something since before we could speak. We evolved in fear. We were born into it." He took another bite of his ration. "Every human alive today is descended from the ones who were too stubborn to die, too mean to quit, too crazy to know when to give up." "That is inefficient evolution," Veltharis observed. "Sure, but we're still here." Doyun looked at the Caliph. "You don't understand us because you think fear is weakness. But fear is information. It tells us something is dangerous. It makes us sharper, faster, stronger. We don't fight without fear. We fight because of it." Veltharis processed this. In Caliph understanding, fear was an error state, a malfunction to be corrected. But these humans spoke of fear like a tool, a weapon. "You are afraid now," Veltharis stated, observing Doyun's biological markers. "Terrified," Doyen agreed easily. "I've been afraid since we landed. I'll probably be afraid until we leave. If we leave." "Yet you continue." "Of course. Being afraid doesn't mean stopping. It means being smart about what comes next." In the distance, sensors detected movement. The Ravagers were preparing for another assault. Doyen stood, checked his weapon, and smiled at Veltharis. "Time to get back to work. You good?" Veltharis had never been asked that question before, had never needed to be asked. But standing there, beside this small human who freely admitted his fear yet stood ready to fight again, Veltharis experienced that strange sensation from the command center. Uncertainty, wrongness, a feeling that the calculations were incomplete. For the first time in 87 cycles, Veltharis wondered if the Caliph understanding of war was missing something fundamental. For the first time, Veltharis wondered if it was possible to be wrong. The second day was worse. Veltharis stood in the command center, watching the ammunition counters drop to critical levels. The numbers told a clear story. At current consumption rates, the humans would run out of bullets in 4 hours. The Ravagers showed no signs of stopping. Captain Minho studied the same displays, his face showing signs of fatigue that the Caliph's sensors easily detected. The human had not slept in 36 hours. His body was running on stimulants and willpower. "Captain," Veltharis said, "I must recommend immediate evacuation. Without ammunition, defensive capability drops to 0. Remaining here is certain death." Minho looked at the tactical display. Red markers showed Ravager positions surrounding the outpost. Green markers showed the 17 colony ships still moving through the evacuation corridor behind them. "How many civilians on those ships?" Minho asked. 340,217, Veltharis reported precisely. "And how long until they're clear of the danger zone?" Veltharis calculated. 26 hours. "Then we stay for 26 hours. Minho's voice was calm, final. "That is illogical. You will all die." Minho turned to face the Caliph observer. His eyes held something that Veltharis could not calculate. Not anger, not fear, something deeper. "How many ships are evacuating because we're holding this line?" Minho asked. 17. "How many civilians will live because we're here?" 340,217, Veltharis repeated. "Then we stay," Minho said simply. "That's the mission. That's what matters." Veltharis could not understand. The equation was simple. 44 humans remaining versus 340,000 civilians. The logical choice seemed obvious, yet it required these 44 to die, to choose death knowingly. The Caliph had never encountered a species that made such choices willingly. The outer defenses fell 2 hours later. The Ravagers breached the walls, swarming into the compound. The battle became close and brutal. Humans fought in the corridors, in the bunkers, in every room and passage. Veltharis watched Private G1 fight a Ravager with nothing but a combat knife. Her rifle was empty. Her pistol was empty. All she had left was the blade and her determination. The Ravager was larger, stronger, covered in natural armor. It should have killed her in seconds. But G1 moved like liquid fear, dodging claws, striking weak points, refusing to die. When the Ravager finally fell, G1 stood over it, breathing hard, covered in its blood and her own. She looked at Veltharis. Her eyes were wild, terrified, alive. "Still here," she said, then picked up the Ravager's fallen weapon and kept fighting. On the eastern defense line, Sergeant Hanna coordinated what she called a counterattack. Veltharis observed the plan and calculated a 17% success probability. The humans attacked anyway. They used improvised explosives, materials scavenged from damaged equipment. They charged into Ravager positions, screaming, not battle cries, just raw human sound. Defiance made audible. The counterattack worked. The Ravagers, confused by prey that refused to act like prey, fell back. The humans reclaimed 2 defensive positions they had lost, 17% probability. But humans achieved it anyway. Veltharis began to understand something. Human tactics were not based on calculation. They were based on will, on the refusal to accept defeat, even when defeat was mathematically certain. That night, what remained of the night cycle, Veltharis stood watch with Corporal Taiho. The human was bleeding from multiple wounds. Medical supplies were exhausted. He had wrapped his injuries in torn cloth and refused evacuation. "You should be in medical care," Veltharis stated. "No medical care left," Taiho replied, checking his weapon with hands that trembled slightly. "Used it all on people hurt worse than me." "You are significantly injured." "I can still fight. That's what matters." They stood in silence for a while. In the distance, the Ravagers gathered for another assault. They never stopped, never tired. The hive intelligence that controlled them felt no fatigue, no doubt. "Can I ask you something?" Taiho said. "Yes." "Do your people fear death?" Veltharis considered. "Death is a cessation of function. It is to be avoided when possible. But fear? No. We do not experience that emotion." "Must be nice. Is it not preferable to your constant state of fear?" Taiho laughed, though it clearly caused him pain. "You'd think so. But fear is what makes us alive. It's what tells us something matters. If I wasn't afraid right now, it would mean I didn't care about those civilians getting away. Didn't care about my squad. Didn't care about anything." He looked at Veltharis with eyes that had seen too much death in too few hours. "You don't understand us because you think we fight despite our fear. But that's not it. We fight because we're afraid. We're terrified of losing, terrified of failing, terrified of letting people down. That terror is what makes us fight harder." "That is paradoxical." "Yeah." Welcome to humanity. The Ravagers attacked again at what the humans called 0300 hours. This assault was different, heavier, more coordinated. The hive intelligence had learned from previous failures. The ammunition counter hit 0 on the northern defensive line, then the eastern line. The automated turrets went silent, their magazines empty. The humans switched to hand-to-hand combat. Veltharis watched in something beyond shock. These small, fragile creatures charged at Ravagers 3 times their size, armed with knives, clubs, pieces of metal ripped from the walls. They fought with fists when weapons broke. They used their teeth when nothing else remained. Private Doyen lost his rifle and started throwing chunks of rubble at the Ravagers while screaming words that Veltharis's translator marked as profanity. When a Ravager got close, he hit it with a piece of broken pipe until it stopped moving. "Is that all you got?" he shouted at the endless swarm. "Come on! I'm still here! I'm still fighting!" Sergeant Hana organized teams to set traps in the corridors. They used power cables as tripwires, unstable fuel cells as proximity explosives. Every Ravager that fell became a barrier, forcing the others to climb over their dead. Captain Minho fought beside his soldiers, no longer safely directing from the command center. His pistol was empty. He used it as a club. When that broke, he found a Ravager claw blade and wielded it like a sword. Veltharis stood in the middle of this chaos, calculating, analyzing, unable to process what it was seeing. Every tactical algorithm said the humans should break, should run, should surrender. But they didn't. They fought harder, and Veltharis felt something impossible. That sensation from before, but stronger now. So much stronger. The Caliph did not have a word for it, had never needed one. But watching Sergeant Hana detonate explosives in a corridor while she was still inside it, just to stop a Ravager breakthrough, watching her survive, barely, crawling back to the defense line with burns covering half her body, watching her pick up a weapon and keep fighting, Veltharis understood. This was fear. Not fear of the enemy. Fear for these humans. Fear of watching them die. Fear of failing to help them. Fear that this impossible stand would end with their deaths, and the galaxy would lose something precious and strange. Veltharis had calculated for 87 cycles, had fought hundreds of battles with perfect logic and zero emotion. Had never questioned the Caliph way of war, but standing there watching Private Jiwan start singing, an old Earth War song about defiance and death, watching the other humans join in, their voices ragged but strong, Veltharis made a choice that had no basis in calculation. The Caliph walked to the nearest weapons rack, picked up a human rifle designed for their smaller hands, uncomfortable for Veltharis's larger frame. The weight was wrong. The grip awkward. None of that mattered. Veltharis walked to the defensive line and stood beside Corporal Tejo. "What are you doing?" Tejo asked, surprised. "I am fighting," Veltharis replied. "Show me how to use this weapon." Tejo's face split into a pained smile. "Now you're getting it." For the first time in its life, Veltharis chose to fight not because of calculations, but despite them. Not because victory was probable, but because the fight mattered. For the first time, Veltharis understood what it meant to be afraid and fight anyway. The humans had taught the Caliph what it meant to be truly alive. The third day arrived with blood and fire. Veltharis had stopped calculating survival odds. The numbers were too painful now. 17 humans remained combat-capable. The outpost was ruins. The defenses were gone. All that stood between the Ravagers and victory was stubborn human will. And somehow, impossibly, the humans still fought. Veltharis stood beside them, firing the awkward human rifle, feeling fear in every calculation process. The Caliph's logical mind screamed that this was wrong, inefficient, certain death. But Veltharis had learned something more important than efficiency. Had learned it from watching these small, fragile creatures refuse to surrender. Some things were worth dying for. Captain Minho directed the defense from a makeshift command post, nothing more than overturned metal barriers and a half-functioning computer terminal. He was critically wounded, hit by Ravager weapons fire during the night assault. His left arm hung useless. Blood stained his uniform, but his voice remained steady as he gave orders. "Hana, reinforce the east corridor. Taiho, we need that junction held for 10 more minutes. Jiwan, get those wounded to the inner bunker." "Captain, you need medical attention," Veltharis said, between bursts of weapons fire. "I'll rest when it's over," Minho replied. "How long until the colony ships are clear?" Veltharis checked the data feed. 4 hours, 17 minutes. "Then we hold for 4 hours, 17 minutes. Private Doyen appeared, running through the defensive positions. He no longer had a rifle, no pistol. He carried a bag of makeshift explosives and a length of cable. His face was covered in dirt and blood, but his eyes were bright with something beyond sanity. "I'm out of bullets," he announced cheerfully, "so I'm throwing rocks, big exploding rocks." He set up his explosives in a corridor, waiting for the Ravagers to charge. When they did, he triggered the blast and laughed as enemies fell. "Still here," he shouted. "Still fighting. Come on, you want some more?" Veltharis observed this and felt that fear sensation again. Not fear of the Ravagers, fear for Doyen, fear that this brave, crazy human would die in the next assault, fear of losing any of them. The Caliph had never cared about individual lives before. Soldiers were assets in calculations. Their deaths were acceptable losses in service of larger objectives. But these humans were not assets. They were people. And Veltharis had learned to care about them. The Ravagers launched their final assault at what humans called 1400 hours. The largest wave yet. Thousands of them covering the ground like a living tide. The Hive intelligence had decided to overwhelm the defenders through sheer numbers. "This is it," Sergeant Hannah said, checking her last magazine. She had survived the corridor explosion, but her body was covered in burns and bandages. She should be unconscious from pain. Instead, she stood ready to fight. "How many bullets do you have left?" Veltharis asked. 23. "You?" 41. Hannah laughed. It was a harsh sound, but genuine. "Well, we better make them count." The Ravagers hit the defenses like a hammer. The humans fired carefully, each shot counting. When ammunition ran out, they switched to whatever they could find: pipes, rocks, pieces of broken equipment. Veltharis watched Private Jiwan lose her last weapon and start fighting with her bare hands. She was crying, tears streaming down her face, but she didn't stop, didn't give up. "I'm so scared," she sobbed, hitting a Ravager with a chunk of metal. "I'm so scared, but I won't stop. I won't let them through." Corporal Tejo fell, finally overwhelmed by his wounds and exhaustion. But even lying on the ground, he grabbed a Ravager's leg as it tried to pass, holding it long enough for another human to destroy it. "Keep going," he gasped. "Don't stop. Never stop." In the command post, Captain Minho collapsed from blood loss. But before losing consciousness, he pressed the communications device into Veltharis's hand. "You're in command now," he whispered. "Finish the mission." Veltharis, a Caliph who had never commanded humans, who had only observed them, suddenly held responsibility for these 17 impossible creatures who refused to die. The fear was overwhelming. "All positions." Veltharis spoke into the communications device, voice steady despite internal chaos. "This is Veltharis. Captain Minho is down. I am assuming tactical command." "Copy that," Hannah responded immediately. No hesitation, no question, just acceptance. Veltharis looked at the tactical display, looked at the humans fighting and dying in every corridor, looked at the countdown showing 3 hours until the colony ships were clear, made a decision. "All personnel, fall back to the central bunker. Establish a final defensive position. We will hold that position until evacuation is complete or until we can no longer fight." The humans retreated in good order, covering each other, dragging wounded. They established a defensive circle in the strongest bunker, their backs literally against the wall. 16 humans remained standing. Veltharis made 17. The Ravagers surrounded them completely. "Well," Doyen said, loading his last explosive device, "at least we'll go out together." "We are not dead yet," Veltharis stated. "True. And while we're alive, we fight." The Ravagers charged the bunker from all sides. The humans met them with everything they had left: strength, courage, pure, stubborn human will. Veltharis fought beside them, no longer an observer, no longer calculating odds, just fighting, just refusing to let these brave creatures die alone. Sergeant Hannah took a position at the doorway, firing until her weapon clicked empty, then using it as a club. When a Ravager claw tore through her shoulder, she screamed in pain, but held the position. "Not through here," she snarled. "You don't get through here." Private Jiwan and Doyun fought back to back, protecting each other's blind spots. They were both wounded, both exhausted, both terrified, but neither stopped fighting. "Remember that time you said Earth food was terrible?" Doyun said between strikes. "You mean yesterday?" Jiwan replied, hitting a Ravager with a piece of pipe. "If we survive this, I'm buying you the best meal on Earth." "Deal. Now shut up and fight." Veltharis experienced something beyond fear, beyond any emotion the Caliph had words for: pride, grief, love for these impossible creatures who fought until their bodies broke, but their spirits never did. The communications terminal beeped, an automated message. The colony ships had cleared the danger zone. All 340,000 civilians were safe. The mission was complete. "We did it," Veltharis announced. "The civilians are safe." For a moment, just a moment, the humans smiled. Then they went back to fighting, because the Ravagers were still coming, and the humans still stood in their way. Veltharis fought beside them, tears leaking from Kalith eyes that had never cried before, fought with fear in every calculation process, fought knowing they would probably die. Fought because these humans had taught the Kalith what truly mattered, not victory, not efficiency, not cold calculation, but standing beside those who needed you, even when standing meant dying. Then, impossible as everything else that had happened in the past 72 hours, the sensors detected new contacts, ships, dozens of them, the relief force, arriving early. All units, this is Fleet Commander Zaltros. We're coming in hot. Hold tight. The cavalry had arrived. The Ravagers, suddenly facing overwhelming firepower from space and stubborn humans on the ground, began to retreat. The Hive intelligence calculated, just as Veltharis had calculated 3 days ago, that the battle was lost. In the bunker, the 17 defenders, 16 humans and 1 Kalith, collapsed, not from defeat, from exhaustion, from relief. They had held. Against impossible odds, with no chance of victory, they had held. Veltharis sat among them, weapons still in hand, and understood finally what it meant to be afraid and fight anyway. Understood what it meant to be truly alive. The medical bay of the relief fleet ship smelled of antiseptic and human sweat. Veltharis sat among the wounded, bandages wrapped around injuries the Kalith had never expected to receive. 3 broken ribs, damage to the left arm, multiple lacerations. The Kalith medical staff were confused. Veltharis had fought, had chosen to fight. This was unprecedented in their recorded history. Around the medical bay, the surviving humans rested in various states of injury. Of the original 47 who had defended Outpost Meridian, 12 remained combat-capable. 31 were wounded but alive. 4 had died holding the line. Veltharis remembered each of their names now, not as assets in a calculation, but as individuals, people who had mattered. Captain Minho lay in the bed next to Veltharis, his body wrapped in advanced medical devices that worked to repair the severe damage. His eyes were open, staring at the ceiling. "Captain," Veltharis said softly, "you should rest." "Did the civilians make it?" Minho asked. His voice was weak but clear. "All 17 colony ships evacuated successfully. 340,217 civilians are safe." Minho smiled. It was a peaceful expression despite his pain. "Worth it. You nearly died. But I didn't. And those people lived. That's what matters." He closed his eyes, exhausted but content. Within moments, he was asleep. Veltharis watched him breathe and felt that fear sensation again. Fear that Minho might still die from his injuries. Fear of losing someone who had taught the Kalith so much. Across the medical bay, Sergeant Hannah sat up in her bed, ignoring the protests of the medical staff. Half her body was covered in burn treatments, but she refused to lie still. "I need to check on my squad," she insisted. "Sergeant, you need rest," a human medic said. "I'll rest when I know my people are okay." She made her way through the medical bay, stopping at each bed, checking on each soldier. When she reached Veltharis, she paused. "You fought," she said simply. "Yes." "Why? You were an observer? You could have stayed safe?" Veltharis considered the question. How to explain in simple words what had taken 3 days of terror to understand. "I learned that some things are worth fighting for, even when fighting is illogical." Hannah smiled, then winced in pain. "Welcome to humanity. That's pretty much our entire philosophy." She continued her rounds, refusing medical treatment until she had seen every member of her squad. Only then did she return to her bed and allow the doctors to work. Private Jiwan and Doyun sat together in one corner of the medical bay, both wrapped in bandages, sharing a meal from the ship's supplies. Real food this time, not rations. Told you I'd buy you a good meal, Doyen said. This is hospital food, Jiwan pointed out, but she was smiling. But I'll take it. They ate in comfortable silence, two humans who had survived the unsurvivable together. Their hands shook slightly, after effects of combat stress that the medical staff said would fade with time. Veltharis approached them carefully. May I speak with you? Of course, Jiwan said, gesturing to an empty chair. You're part of the squad now. I am Kalith, not human. Doesn't matter. You stood with us. You fought beside us. That makes you one of us. Doyun nodded agreement. She's right. Species doesn't matter. What matters is what you do when things get hard. Veltharis sat with them, processing this concept. The Kalith organized everything by species, by classification, by logical categories. But humans seemed to organize by actions, by choices, by shared experience. I am writing my combat report for the Kalith High Command, Veltharis said. I do not know how to explain what I witnessed. Tell them the truth, Jiwan suggested. Tell them we're crazy, stubborn, and too mean to die. I do not think they will understand. Then make them understand, Doyen said seriously. What we did matters, not just holding the outpost, but what it represents. That's worth writing about. That night, Veltharis sat in quarters assigned by the fleet, staring at the blank report document. How to explain in Kalith terms what defied all Kalith understanding. Finally, Veltharis began to write. Observation report. Human combat effectiveness. Outpost meridian defense. The humans do not fight without fear. They fight despite it. More accurately, they fight because of it. Fear, which the Kalith have long considered a malfunction to be eliminated, is the very thing that makes human combat effectiveness impossible to calculate. When afraid, humans do not flee. They do not freeze. They become sharper, faster, more determined. Fear tells them something matters, and when something matters, humans will sacrifice everything to protect it. I observed Private Jiwan risk death to save an alien she had never met. I observed Sergeant Hana hold a position that should have killed her, simply because retreating would have endangered others. I observed Corporal Taiho repair equipment while wounded and under fire, because the mission required it. I observed Captain Minho continue commanding despite injuries that should have rendered him unconscious because his soldiers needed leadership. I observed Private Doyen fight with improvised weapons and pure determination when all logical options were exhausted. I observed humans sing while facing certain death, not from madness, but from defiance. Most significantly, I observed myself choose to fight beside them. This choice violated every principle of Kalith tactical doctrine. There was no calculation that justified it. No logical reason for a Kalith observer to risk death defending humans. I fought because they taught me that logic is not enough. Calculation is not enough. Survival is not the only measure of success. Recommendation: the Galactic Coalition must study human combat psychology and tactical doctrine. Not to copy it, most species cannot replicate human fear-driven determination, but to understand it. Because humans are the most dangerous species I have encountered, not because they are fearless, but because they refuse to let fear control them. They have weaponized terror. They have transformed weakness into strength. They have made the illogical into the inevitable. The humans held Outpost Meridian for 72 hours against overwhelming odds because they decided to hold it. That is all the reason they needed. That is all the reason they will ever need. I respectfully request permanent assignment to human military units. I have calculations to complete, but more importantly, I have much more to learn. Veltharis sent the report and sat back, wondering how the High Command would respond, wondering if they would understand. The door to the quarters chimed. Veltharis opened it to find Corporal Tyho standing there, leaning on a crutch, his leg still healing. "The squad is gathering in the observation deck," Tyho said. "Memorial service for the ones we lost. Thought you might want to come." "I am not human," Veltharis said quietly. "Is it appropriate? You fought beside us. You bled beside us. That makes you one of us. Come on." The observation deck looked out into space, stars scattered across the darkness like scattered light. The 12 combat-capable humans stood together, along with those wounded who could walk. They had dressed in their formal uniforms, standing at attention. Captain Minho stood at the front, still pale but steady. He spoke the names of the 4 humans who had died, spoke of their service, their sacrifice, their courage. Then he spoke words that Veltharis did not fully understand, but felt deeply. They stood when standing was all that remained. They fought when fighting seemed pointless. They died so others could live. That is the definition of a soldier. That is the definition of a human being. The humans saluted. Veltharis, not knowing what else to do, saluted as well. After the formal service ended, the humans stayed together, talking quietly, sharing memories. Sergeant Hana approached Veltharis. "You don't have to stand apart," she said. "We're your squad now if you want us to be. I am Kalith, and we're human. Doesn't change anything. You stood with us. You fought beside us. You're one of us now." She placed a hand on Veltharis's shoulder, a gesture the Kalith had learned meant acceptance, friendship, trust. Private Doyen joined them, grinning despite his bandages. "So what did you think? Was battling beside humanity everything you expected?" Veltharis thought about the question. About 3 days of terror and courage, about fighting past the point where logic said to stop, about learning to fear and fight anyway. "It made me experience fear like never previously," Veltharis said carefully, "and I am grateful." "Grateful to be afraid?" Jiwan asked, joining the group. "Grateful to learn what fear truly means, what it teaches, what it enables." Veltharis looked at each of them. "You taught me that being alive is not about survival. It is about choosing what to stand for, even when standing means dying." Hana smiled. "You really are one of us now." That night, Veltharis stood at the window, looking at the stars, processing everything that had changed in 72 hours. The Kalith who had arrived at Outpost Meridian no longer existed. That being had operated on pure logic, calculating odds, avoiding unnecessary risk. The Kalith who stood here now understood something deeper. Understood that the most important things in existence could not be calculated, could not be reduced to equations. Some things you simply chose to stand for. Some things were worth being afraid for. Some things were worth dying for. And the strangest thing of all, standing with creatures who understood this, who lived this every day, made life worth living. Behind Veltharis, the human squad gathered, their voices warm with friendship and shared survival. They called to the Kalith to join them. Veltharis turned away from the cold stars and walked toward the warmth of humanity. For the first time in 87 cycles, Veltharis understood what it meant to have a family. And for the first time, Veltharis was not afraid of what came next, because whatever came next, the Kalith would face it beside humanity. And that made all the difference.